Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of Mother Doctor Nurse, where we're going to be answering your questions live. And today we are talking about crying babies. Babies cry, sometimes a lot, and often it's for completely normal reasons. They're hungry, tired, or wet, but it's not always easy to work out what's going on. And it can be distressing for everyone. Pediatrician Dr. Deb Levy and pediatric nurse Sarah Hunstead are here to answer your questions about why your baby might be crying. So if you've joined us live today, please pop your comments below or your questions below, I should say, and we will attempt to get to them during this live chat. And I would like to encourage anyone who's listening, just give us a thumbs up or a heart or a like or something, just so we know that you're there and we're not broadcasting to Sarah's computer alone.
That would be terrible. I mean, we're live. What could go wrong? I mean, seriously.
What could go wrong? Nothing at all. So babies crying. I remember a midwife said once to me, after my babies were no longer babies, she said, babies are born to feed, not sleep. And in amongst all of that, I was like, right. Okay. So they're not designed just to sleep and be peaceful. They've got needs. Those needs want to be met. But it can be quite shocking when you have your first baby, just how much they can cry. I mean, did you ladies have an experience like that? Like, what were your babies like? Sarah, I'll start with you.
Oh, I remember the midwife actually said to me in hospital, "Oh, you're a step ahead. You're a pediatric nurse." And I was like, no, but they don't belong to me in the hospital. You know, I'm taking this baby home and it's like, this is a well baby. I don't know what to do with them. And I feed them, make sure they're alive. But no, my first one, she cried a lot. I'm surprised I went back for a second one 18 months later, but she didn't cry. So, you know, it was one of those ones where you're like, geez, you know, I'm glad I had the one who cried first because I think it prepared me in how much I appreciated the second one.
The second one. Deb, what about your girls? Did they cry a lot?
I mean, I wonder if that's a trend. It'd be interesting to do a little bit of a poll in the group that are listening to us, because my first one was definitely my more unsettled one. And then my second baby was a dream. But I still called it quits after two.
I wonder if it's, though, something about us as well as mothers and
100%.
parents. But by the second one, you're like, oh, I learned so much the first time round. But that's not to say you don't have a second, third, or fourth baby and you're joining us live and you have concerns about crying. So please feel free to pop your questions below. I am going to start with this question from Tara. She says, in your last episode, you mentioned crying or lack thereof as a red flag if your baby is unwell. Can we hear more about this? That is, when is crying something to be concerned about? Deb, I might give that one to you.
Sure. I think what we spoke about in the last episode were, you know, red flags to look about if your baby is unwell in general. You know, so a change in their crying is a definite alert. And I'm sure Sarah will agree with me. And a change in crying in terms of exactly what it sounds like. So for us medicos, we talk about a high-pitched cry being worrying. And you will know if you hear it. You know, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, what is that? But you will know the difference. So a different sound to your baby's cry, a different strength to your baby's cry. So an exceptionally weak cry could also be worrying. And then a lack of a cry is more around if your baby is actually just too lethargic, too unwell to even muster that energy to try and alert you to a problem.
Yep, absolutely. That can be a big red flag in itself. And I know we've got a question about that later as well. So I think we'll expand on that one too.
Cool.
Oh, okay. So let's go to this next question from Kylie. How much crying is too much for Bub, not me? ?
I love this. I love your honesty, Kylie, for a start. And, you know, I think just before Deb gets into this, because I think she's the right person to answer, but a part of this too is about looking after yourself. And, you know, because if you are feeling like you are crying too much, please, please, please reach out and get help. I know that is one of the hardest things you can ever do. And as saying that is, well, with mum friends, if you are noticing that one of your friends is just not coping, please have a conversation with them. So it's not just about the babies, it's about us too. But Deb, I'll handball this to you.
Absolutely. Look, we talk about crying in terms of what's normal and then what's more concerning. So it is normal for a baby to cry up to a point. You know, it is a baby's only form of communication. You know, and here obviously I'm talking about little babies before they're able to actually speak. So, you know, they may be crying to say, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I want to cuddle, you know, whatever it might be. So this is their way of communicating. We kind of talk about, you know, from, you know, 1 to 3 hours as being within the norm. That doesn't mean that if your baby's been crying for 2.5 hours, but is inconsolable, you know, is absolutely screeching, unsettled.
Oh, I think Deb's
So
dropping out
it's
a little
not
bit.
just about how long, it's also about the actual, the quality of your baby's cry and how they are as a whole.
You dropped out a little bit there, Deb, but I think we got the general
Sorry.
gist is that you're saying that if they are crying in a distressed manner for a long period of time, you don't just go, oh, I can let them go for 3 hours. That's basically what you're saying, correct? Excellent. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I feel like I cut you off.
Oh, no, not at all. I think that what Deb has said is, you know, absolutely spot on. And just, I'm going to reiterate again, because I feel like we so can't say this enough, is keep tabs on your own crying too.
Yeah.
And your emotions,
absolutely.
not just tears,
Yeah.
not just tears, more than tears.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
something I often talk about is about, you know, the fact that when your baby's crying, it's not just about the baby being held, it's about the mum being held as well. You know, because it is so challenging to have an unsettled, upset baby. Reach out and find those supports that you need.
It triggers everything, doesn't it? Like it's like it's hardwired into you, even if you know there's a reason for their crying. It's hardwired into you to feel I've got to help them stop crying, which actually, good segue, leads to Jessie's question, which she says is weird, but I think is really normal. Is crying ever a good thing?
Well,
absolutely.
Yes. Yes, it is. I'm going to take the kind of the first 80 part of this question first, and then Deb can take a bit more of the medical part as well. But the first thing that pops into my mind is when a kid whacks their head on something. So, you know, whether it be myself, who may or may not have had her 6-week-old baby in her arms at 2 o'clock in the morning, moving to a different room to feed, and then proceeded to whack her 6-week-old baby's head in the door frame. Yes, and she still reminds me 15 years later that I did
Like
that
she
to her.
remembers.
Oh,
Come
she wouldn't
on.
have a clue, but, you know, of course, you know, it comes up around the dinner table every now and again. Crying is awesome. So thinking about a head injury when a child hits their head, what do we want? We want them to immediately cry, to protest, so that they've got this reaction. Because what do we know? We know that when it comes to injury, crying is a good thing. 1, it means they're conscious. 2, it means their airway is working, they're breathing. So they're the 2 main things that we want when a child is injured. So for me as a nurse, when a kid hurts themselves, whether it be a toddler or you're whacking your 6-week-old baby's head into a doorframe, the louder they cry, the happier you are. Not to say that anything, you know, that they don't need to go to hospital or anything like that, but they're conscious and they're breathing, and that's what we want. Deb, what do you have to add?
I mean, as I said in the beginning, you know, it is their form of communication, and they are telling you something as well. You know, they're alerting you to whatever's bugging them.
Exactly. Thank you, Jessie. That was really great to get that question. I do have a statement here, but I think it's worth putting up. Georgia says, I don't really have a question, but as an experienced mum, I just want to say, trust your gut. There was a time when my son was crying, but it was different to their normal and just didn't feel right. I got help and was glad I did. For any new mums out there, trust your gut. Now, I know that both you, Sarah, and Deb feel quite strongly about trusting your instinct. Could you maybe shed some light on why that is what George is saying? It's from her wisdom, but it's also from a medical perspective, right? I mean, Sarah, can I start with you?
I'd love to tell a story here that illustrates this perfectly. And this is a friend of mine who, when she had her first baby, she used to describe her baby as just this little peanut who would just sleep and feed, didn't cry. Wow. For a start, I remember this pang of jealousy, kind of, when she said that, coming up in my stomach. But anyway, that's a different story. So she said that her baby didn't normally cry, was very, very settled. But one evening she noticed after her feed, every time she went to put her baby down, she'd scream. And that was completely out of character. So she would scream, she'd pick her up, and she still wouldn't be fully consoled. She was still crying, go to put her down again, screaming again. And she said the cry was weird. She described it as a bit like a cat meowing. She couldn't see that there was anything else wrong with Bub, but she went, this is not right. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to the hospital. Went to the hospital. Cut a long story short, after investigations, they actually found that Bub had meningitis. So,
Holy moly.
yes, I know. So, not to say that every time your baby cries that your child has meningitis. Please don't think that. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that immediately Mum knew that this was different. She wasn't consolable, and she knew that something wasn't right. And she could have just, gone, oh, okay, this is a bit weird, but I'm just going to try and push through it. But she trusted her gut that something was really wrong with her baby. And all clinicians, if you're out there listening, just a little reminder that we always need to remember that parents know their kids best, and that we need to listen when a parent's gut is telling them that something is wrong. So parents, insist. If you are being rejected by a clinician, keep going and tell them that you are worried.
And Deb, your experience with I imagine you get a lot of parents coming to see you with their own concerns about their child, and that starts with their gut instinct, right?
Absolutely. I think that, and Sarah said this again, when we started, that it was like, oh, you're a pediatric nurse. This is going to be easy for you. But I had the same experience as a pediatrician. It is the toughest thing having a child. And I'm saying a child because I think at different ages, it poses different challenges. But with a little baby, you're learning each other. You're learning how your baby is trying to express themselves to you. They're learning about the whole world. And it is very, very challenging. And what I usually recommend is trying to find a good support team, ears that'll listen, people that will help you during this challenging time and not just brush you off, or disregard your concerns. Because as a mum, you are your child's primary advocate. And if you are worried, you should pursue that. And that includes if one person does brush you off and say, oh, no, that's all normal. Let's just move on. Because if you're worried, get it seen to.
Exactly. Thank you for that statement, Georgia. It's actually really, I think, enlightening for everyone. Kirsty says, hey, ladies, is it normal for babies to cry in their sleep? Are they too young to have nightmares? That's an interesting question. Who wants to take that?
Look, I think before, sorry, I just jumped straight in. I think, good, Sarah says. When do babies start dreaming and having nightmares? You're right. It's not for little babies, within the first few months of life. We don't believe that they are yet. But it doesn't mean that they're not perhaps uncomfortable, in pain, their sleep pattern, perhaps they're coming out of a deep sleep into a more shallow sleep, and that's unsettling them a bit. So I think that it all, and I hate using this phrase, but it kind of all depends. And it all depends on how extreme the crying is and how prolonged the crying is. But if it's one little squawk and then the baby's settling straight back down to sleep, I really wouldn't be that bothered by it. But if it's a persistent recurring event, then I'd be going, well, are they in pain? Have they been bitten by something? Is there something else that's uncomfortable? I would look deeper into it. And I guess that's part of, the 5 things that I think you have to exclude when you're talking about your baby, in terms of why they are crying. But I'm sure we'll go into that in a little bit more depth.
Well,
I
actually,
want to know. Sorry, I was going to say, I want to know what babies dream about. Like, do they just dream about bottles and boobs and dummies and stuff? Like, what do they
Surely.
dream about?
Haven't you
Sarah,
watched?
that's a very philosophical question.
Haven't you watched Boss Baby? I'll just send you off. You can watch that later.
It's one of my favorites.
I would say I'd love to follow on from what you just said there, actually, Deb, and talk about those 5 things that you would go through when your baby's crying. Could you talk us through that now?
Sure. I try and keep things as simple as possible, bearing in mind, of course, we really do have to go a little bit deeper. But, there's 5 things that I talk about are: 1, are they hungry? So it's a simple, have they not fed enough? Or on the corollary, have they overfed? So, is it around their hunger? 2, are they tired? So are they actually just overtired or overstimulated, and then they can't get to sleep and they're just crying and crying? So hungry, tired, dirty. And I don't mean have you bathed them, but I mean more their diaper. So, have they got a wee or a poo sitting in their diaper making them uncomfortable? 4, are they in pain? And in pain can be from a variety of things. So I'll go into that in a second. Or 5, are they sick? Are they unwell? And is this their way of talking to you? So I guess just to, summarize those 5 again: are they hungry? Are they dirty? Are they in pain, sick, or tired?
And what were you going to say about the pain, Deb?
So the pain, again, trying to keep things in a way to remember, it's either stuff coming from the outside in or stuff from the inside out. And stuff on the outside, I'll probably leave to Sarah, because that's talking about things like hair tourniquets and insect bites and bits of skin being stuck in zippers and horrible things like that. Exactly, Sarah, that's your deal. Pain from the inside out, I guess, the 2 main causes, and certainly not exhaustive, but those are things like reflux. Could your child have gastroesophageal reflux, or could they have colic, or could they be in this purple period? So those would be the 2 main things that I would look into in terms of pain.
And sorry, what do you mean by purple period?
I love this term. I don't love the period because it's quite traumatic for families, but it's a great term because it actually explains exactly what it is. Often people will refer to their babies as colicky, or perhaps health practitioners will say, your baby has colic, which I think is a little bit confusing because it's not a pathological, physiological, medical diagnosis. And, and the word colic to me sounds like it could be. But there's another term that came out of the US, coined by a pediatrician there. I take no claim for it. And it's the purple period. And I'll run through what it all stands for. It's a mnemonic. And for those of you who know me, know I love a good mnemonic. So Sarah's chuckling, so Siobhan. So P stands for the peak period of crying. So that's at around about 2 months. So typically that's when things kick off, and then they peak, and then they start to get better again. So P is for the peak. U is for unexplained. So that's when you've gone through those 5 things, and, perhaps your healthcare providers had, had a review of your child. So it's unexplained. We don't really know why they're crying. R is for they're resistant to soothing. We can also talk about that if you want, some tips in order to how to try and soothe your baby. But really, this is a baby who, no matter what you do, just continues to cry. That very, very frustrating high risk period. P is for pain-like face. So really looks like they're in pain. They're grimacing, scrunching up their eyes. Really, really a painful face. L is for long-lasting. And this refers to that I spoke about in the beginning. So this is an extended period beyond that. E, so the last E of purple, is that it usually occurs in the evening time. You often hear people talking about the bewitching hours or witching hours, sorry. Witching hour, exactly. And then the period at the end is a full stop, which is the best part of the whole mnemonic because it means it ends. It is a defined period of time. It usually ends when they're around about 5 months of age. I know, which I think is a very good space to sit in as a parent if you know that this too shall pass.
Yeah. Oh, that is so, so important. I'm just going to move on to another question, unless, Sarah, there is something you would like to add to that.
Oh, no, I think that was a perfect explanation of the purple period.
Purple period. That's something we'll probably need to put in the notes. Lisa says, hi, my little one cries after breastfeeding when I've eaten something with chili in it. Could what I'm eating affect him whilst breastfeeding?
Oh.
Who's
Deb,
gonna
this is
answer
all.
that one?
Oh, that's Deb. This is a Deb question for sure. I tell you what, I know when I've eaten chili as well the next day, but surely the baby can too.
Look,
Sorry, had to bring it down.
No,
Had to bring it down.
No, exactly. It didn't go down well. Mind the pun. It's a little. I'm pausing because it's actually a little bit controversial. So, some practitioners will strongly believe that whatever the mother eats will be passed through in the breast milk. Other practitioners less so. I'm more, in the initial, I actually think it all passes through. And I think that whatever impacts mom can impact Bob. So, yes, I do believe that whatever you're eating can impact your baby. And there's especially one food that I'm happy to talk about that I do believe can be implicated in things like reflux, and that is dairy and its little partner soy. So absolutely, looking at your diet as a breastfeeding mom is important. But please, sorry, I'm just jumping in here before you move on. Please be very, very careful about just taking foods out of your diet. I really never advocate for that because I never want a mum to become depleted herself. So always do it under the care of a healthcare provider or dietitian.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question here from Amber. So actually, sorry, let me just hide that for a minute. Let's just have this question. The first question from Amber is, my youngest would often cry so hard he would almost stop breathing, lips turning blue, etc. And she follows that up with, what's your best advice to help them catch their breath back? So how normal is it for a baby to cry that hard that and I'm assuming that this was a regular occurrence, Amber, but that your baby was okay. So that can be distressing for a parent, right? It might be, is it possible for it to be completely normal, but they cry so hard they almost stop breathing?
It definitely is. So children can have breath holding episodes, which can be terrifying, where literally they pass out because they have been holding their breath, often due to when they have been crying or an emotional disturbance, for want of a better word. And it's really interesting. I remember once a woman came running into well, actually, she didn't come running into ED. She came walking into ED with her child who had a massive laceration across his head. And she's like, yes, we're here again. And I'm like, oh, gosh, okay, here we go. And then when I went to go and put something over the top after I'd had a look at this child's cut, he was a little toddler. He then started to cry and mum said, stop, don't touch him. He's a breath holder. And I went, oh, and before my eyes, this kid stopped breathing, turned navy blue and collapsed. And with every fiber of my being, I wanted to scoop him up and run him into the resus room and put oxygen on him. But mum was calm. She's gone, no, just don't touch him. Leave him alone. He'll start breathing again soon. So It's one of those things that absolutely can happen. But Deb, do you want to go into the more clinical aspects of that?
Look, I agree. There are a group of kids, and usually they're older. So it's not normally babies who will breath hold. And often there's iron deficiency and other things going on there. So there's that group. I think that it's very, very important, though, to note that if your baby ever changes color, and in terms of blue color, sorry, babies will usually get a little bit red in the face and purpley, in their face. But I'm talking about their lips, their mouth. If they ever change color while they're crying, they should be medically reviewed. Because what I worry about, being the worrywart medic that I am, I want to make sure there's nothing cardiac going on. So I want to make sure they're not being compromised in other ways. So especially these are the very young babies. If they're having any kind of color change, they should be medically reviewed.
Yes.
So I'm not sure, Amber, how old your little one is or whether they were assessed, but I can assure you, Sarah, that experienced mum that you speak about would have gone through a whole batch of tests and reviews before they were given that label of breath holding.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, and this is something, once again, this child was 3 years old. He was a toddler, not a little baby. So that's something that's, really important to remember too.
Yeah. Look, this is nothing to do with our topic, but I think it's worth putting up because I love this comment. So Amber, who we were just hearing from, actually says, "Hello, loving your new podcast. Keep them coming." Thank you, Amber. So if you have joined us live, this is to be part of our podcast, Mother, Doctor, Nurse, where Sarah and Deb answer your questions every week. Every so often, we're going to pop in and do a live event like this, but it will become an episode as part of the podcast. So thank you for that. Love to have those comments. Just put that up there. So this one actually feeds into something that you, I think, were mentioning before, Deb, and I'm going to direct this question to Sarah. I've read that if your baby is crying nonstop, to check their hands and feet for cotton or hair wrapped around their toes or fingers. Is this a thing? And if so, what could happen? Sarah?
It definitely is a thing. So it's called a hair tourniquet. And particularly, I don't know about you, but certainly all my hair fell out when I postpartum after I'd had my kids. And what can happen is mum's hair or a carer's hair can, go into, the cot or, the onesie, or even thinking about in onesies, little bits of cotton and little bits of cotton in socks as well. If they actually get around a little toe or a finger or even the tip of a penis, what it can do is it can really wrap around quite tightly and it can constrict the blood flow. So often one of the first things that a carer might notice is that their child becomes really unsettled. So if ever your child's okay and then they become really unsettled, crying, it may seem like they're in pain, check their fingers and toes. It's something that's going to take you 10 seconds to do, but check. So often when they're in the little onesies in the middle of the night, it's not something we think of, but have a look. And what you might see, you may not be able to see the actual hair or cotton that's wrapped around, but you may notice that the tip of that little finger or toe might be quite red or purple. Now, what we do recommend is that you do go to hospital to get that removed. There's lots of stuff in the interwebs out there that say, you can just get some Nair at home and pop it on and all the rest of it. But in my experience of getting these things off, they can be really, really stuck in there. And you need, big magnifying things and special tools to be able to really make sure that that hair is out. So please, if you suspect that your child does have a hair tourniquet, it's off to the hospital, and it's actually an urgent thing because it doesn't take that long for damage to be done when the blood supply is being compromised to a little finger or toe. Deb, do you want to add anything to that?
No, Sarah, I think you covered it absolutely perfectly.
Got the Dr. Deb's seal of approval.
Phew.
This next question comes from Quinn. Hi, ladies. I've read heaps about different types of cries in babies. I'm almost due and worried I'm not going to be able to tell the difference. Is it really obvious? Who'd like to take that one?
I just anecdotally, to be honest, I think you really do learn to know. You end up tuning into these cries, and it's such a naff response when I say that. Oh, yes, you'll know. But you actually do get in tune to those cries. And there's a lot of literature out there that talks about, 3 or 4 different, main types of cries and so on. I'm certainly not an expert in that. Deb probably knows a lot more than I do about that. But You do. It's sometimes, and I even notice now that with my kids, if and they're teens, that if a certain cry comes from one of them, I'm like, oh, you're okay. But they even still cry differently if they've actually really truly hurt themselves and they're not just trying to get off a day's school. So I think you do become attuned to that quite young.
Would you agree with that, Deb? Are there ways of
Absolutely.
telling what cries mean?
There is a lot out there, and there's the meh and the nah and all these other funny sounds that are supposed to mean certain things. But I do think it's just a bit of time and getting to know your baby. You definitely can pick it up. And I think, Sarah and we've heard a lot of babies and a lot of different babies cry, and I'm sure you can figure it out too, right, Sarah? And that's
Yeah,
just from
absolutely.
time and just from the experience of listening to the cries and working it out. So
Definitely time.
congratulations. It's an exciting time ahead. I also just want to say, don't be totally lulled into that false sense of security for the first few weeks when they actually don't do a lot of crying. There's usually crying, and they usually wake up at around about that 2-week mark and go, oh, I can actually say something with my little cry and my voice here. But enjoy the journey.
Yes, and give yourself time, because I don't know anyone who had their baby and straight away understood what cry meant what. It is just, and I just think we forget. We think we're going to give birth and immediately know what to do as mothers. But it's a process, like you say,
Oh,
Deb, of getting to know each other, getting to know your baby, and they're nonverbal, so give yourself time.
I think, yeah, it's so important to do that. And, it's okay not to know what to do as well. It really is. You're not
Yes.
expected to be that baby expert the second this child comes into the world. And the other thing I think we need to do as well is, as they do start to get a bit older, we do know when it's that, that it's okay to step away for a bit as well for your own sake. I can remember making sure that my 6-month-old was safe, putting her in her cot where she couldn't be hurt. She was fed, she was dry, all of those things, but she was screaming. And I needed to step away for me, making sure she was safe, shut that door and left, not for very long. Like, I'm not talking 3 or 4 days here. It was only a matter of minutes, but I needed to do
24
that.
hours.
Yeah, I needed to do that for me, for my head, and that's okay as well.
Mm. We have a question here from Priya. She says, my baby cries a lot, especially after a feed. How do I know if he has reflux? And what is silent reflux? I'm going to put that one to Deb.
Okay. How long do we have here to answer this question?
Give
This
us
often
your
takes an hour consultation to work this out.
tip of the iceberg answer.
The tip of the iceberg answer is, I'll address the last one first, in terms of what is silent reflux. So silent reflux, actually, no, let me take a step back and go, well, what are we talking about here? What is reflux? Here we're referring to gastroesophageal reflux, which essentially is movement of the milk sitting in the stomach back up the food pipe, which is called the esophagus. The vast majority of babies are born with a degree of this. In some of them, it upsets them and it hurts them and can cause problems. So the fact that a baby is crying after a feed is possibly one of the clues that it could be reflux, but there are a whole lot of things that we look at. Vomiting is one of them, but it's not always present. If it's not present, but they've got the whole batch of other symptoms and we think it's reflux, that's when we then call it silent reflux. So not silent like your baby's not crying, but silent because they're not vomiting. So, the other things that we look at is, are they grimacing, again, that painful face while they're feeding? Are they pulling on and off? Do they not want to feed? Is their whole body stiffening, which is a sign they're in pain? Is it when they're lying down? Do they not like being in the car seat? I mean, I'm giving a whole list of things here just to, really illustrate the importance of a thorough history when assessing your child. Because usually when they're examined, they actually examine perfectly healthy. Sometimes if their reflux is quite significant and severe, they won't be gaining weight as well. but that's quite a small minority of children. The majority of children with reflux sit somewhere in the middle where they're uncomfortable, they're experiencing some pain, but they're otherwise growing and thriving.
Now, I know that we touched on this one previously, but I think it's worth bringing up. Um, Kirsty says, "Hi, lovely ladies. What actually is colic? And what do people mean when they say a baby is a colicky baby?" Now, Deb, I know you were talking about this when we were talking about the purple period. I must admit, I always thought a colicky baby was a baby who might have wind. That's what I understood it to mean. Is that part of what people mean when they say that?
Possibly, because it's hard to say because, does wind actually hurt babies? We don't really know that. That's a little bit contentious. And then the other point is when babies cry, it actually causes more wind because they're gulping in the air. So then they cry more, then they've got more wind. And like, well, what's really coming first? It can be quite difficult to work that out. So, the term colicky to me means, yes, maybe they've got some extra wind, but they're more unsettled, more, they're crying more, and they're otherwise healthy and thriving. And it's more just a collection of symptoms.
And look, we have time for probably just one more question. And this comes from Ola. She says, "To be honest, I feel like my baby cries a lot more than the other babies in my mother's group. He's been seen by my GP who said everything is normal. Does this mean he's just a cranky baby?" And that was from Ola. Do you know what? I reckon I came into motherhood feeling with very, very low expectations because I reckon both of my babies cried all the time and I just thought it was normal. Like I just thought that was motherhood and that's what it was to have a baby. So I didn't think my babies were cranky, Ola, and they cried all the time. So maybe I just set the bar really low.
And the other thing too is are the other babies really not crying all the time? Are they really not? Or is it one of those ones where it's like, no, I've got a perfect baby?
And maybe it's only for that period. Maybe they walk out the door of mother's group and start bawling.
Exactly.
I don't know. What would you say, Deb?
Look, I think that there is a degree of temperament that comes to play in these things. And I'm not going to call your baby cranky, but it's possible that they just like to express themselves a little more. But that being said,
So diplomatic, Deb.
Exactly right. That being said, drawing back to the whole trust your gut, listen to your instinct. Even if your GP, has seen your baby and thinks everything is normal, if you still inside aren't happy with that, have them reviewed again.
Yeah. Well, ladies, I might wrap it up there because we've had a good chat about crying. So thank you again for answering all these questions. And I will put it out there that we'll be back with another episode of Mother Doctor Nurse next week. It won't be live, but you can email your questions through to feedplaylove@sea.com.au or put your questions below because the topic is going to be boy genitals. So this is especially for the mothers out there like me who don't know. Male genitals, sorry. My producer's telling me I'm using the wrong word. Male genitals, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. So if you have a question, boy bits. That too. Any questions you have, don't be shy. You can pop them below this live stream. You can email, like I said, feedplaylove@sea.com.au. And we will have an episode in the podcast. So please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You will find Feed Play Love on the listener platform or wherever you get your podcasts. Ladies, thank you so much. And we'll speak again next week.
See, thanks for your questions, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.